My name is Erin. I'm 28 years old and I thought I knew what family meant until the night my sister tried to kill me for $1.5 billion. I was standing on the deck of our grandfather's luxury yacht, watching the California sunset paint San Francisco Bay in shades of gold and crimson. The gentle rocking of the 200-foot vessel, the sound of laughter from our family gathered for Grandpa William's 60th birthday celebration, the warm ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt and freedom. Everything felt perfect. But when I glanced at my sister Sophia, something cold twisted in my stomach. Her eyes held a darkness I'd never seen before, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this beautiful evening was about to become a nightmare. I had no idea that within hours she would scream those words that still echo in my nightmares. Before I share what happened that night, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like button if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely. Subscribe for more true stories that will shock you, and stick around because what happened next changed my life forever. To understand how we got to that horrific moment, you need to know about our family. My grandfather, William Morrison, built his empire from nothing, starting with a single apartment building in Oakland and growing it into a real estate empire worth $1.5 billion. The Morrison name was synonymous with luxury developments across California, from beachfront condos in Santa Barbara to high-rise towers in downtown Los Angeles. Growing up, Sophia and I were inseparable. We spent our childhood running through the halls of our family's Malibu estate, playing hide-and-seek in rooms bigger than most people's entire homes. We had matching pink bicycles, shared a massive dollhouse that cost more than a car, and every summer we'd spend weeks on Grandpa's previous yacht, learning to sail and diving for shells in crystal-clear waters. But even as kids, our personalities were night and day. I was the one with my nose buried in books, fascinated by the business side of our family's success. By age 12, I was sitting in on board meetings asking questions about property values and market trends. Sophia preferred the spotlight, always dressed in the latest designer clothes, more interested in which celebrity was dating whom than quarterly profit reports. When I turned 18, I immediately started working at Morrison Properties. I began in the mailroom despite Grandpa's protests that I should start higher up. I wanted to learn every aspect of the business from the ground up. I worked 60-hour weeks, studied market analysis reports late into the night, and slowly proved myself capable of handling increasingly complex projects. Sophia, meanwhile, was living her best life. She attended USC, but spent more time at sorority parties than in classrooms. Her Instagram was filled with photos from Coachella weekend trips to Las Vegas and shopping sprees on Rodeo Drive. Every month, $25,000 disappeared from her trust fund account, funding a lifestyle that would make reality TV stars jealous. For 10 years, I dedicated myself to the family business. I negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions, oversaw construction projects that employed thousands of workers, and helped expand our portfolio into sustainable housing developments. Grandpa began relying on me more and more often, saying I had the Morrison instinct for profitable investments. What I didn't know was that Grandpa had been quietly preparing his will. He'd watched both of his granddaughters for decades, seeing who truly cared about preserving the family legacy versus who saw it as an endless ATM machine. The decision he made would tear our family apart forever. 3 weeks before his birthday celebration, he'd met with his attorney and made a choice that would change everything. The entire Morrison fortune, every property, every investment account, every asset worth $1.5 billion would go to me. In his mind, I'd earned it through years of dedication and hard work. Recently, I'd started noticing changes in Sophia's behavior toward me. The warm hugs became brief, obligatory embraces. Her laughter seemed forced when I was around. She'd make subtle comments about how I was becoming Grandpa's favorite, how I thought I was so much better than her because I wore business suits instead of designer dresses. I tried addressing it directly, asking if something was bothering her, but she'd flash that perfect smile and insist everything was fine. The tension was building, but I assumed it was normal sibling rivalry that would eventually fade. The plan for Grandpa's birthday was elaborate. We'd chartered his pride and joy, the Golden Dream, a pristine yacht with 3 levels of luxury amenities. The main dining room could seat 40 guests comfortably, with floor-to-ceiling windows providing panoramic ocean views. The upper deck featured a full bar and lounge area, while the top level had a helicopter landing pad that we'd converted into a dance floor for the evening. 30 family members and close friends were invited, including Uncle Marcus, Aunt Helen, and various cousins I only saw at major celebrations. Everyone was excited to honor the man who'd built our family's fortune and provided opportunities we'd never dreamed of. I spent weeks planning every detail, from the menu featuring Grandpa's favorite lobster thermidor to the playlist of big band music from his youth. I wanted this to be the perfect celebration of an incredible man who'd given us everything. I had no idea it would become the setting for the worst betrayal imaginable. The morning of the celebration dawned bright and clear with gentle swells and perfect sailing conditions. I chose my favorite navy blue dress, the one Grandpa always said brought out my eyes, and carefully wrapped the vintage Rolex I'd found at an estate sale in Napa. It was from 1952, the same year he'd bought his first building, and I knew he'd appreciate the symbolism. Arriving at the marina, I felt that familiar flutter of excitement seeing the Golden Dream gleaming in the morning sunlight. At 200 feet long, she was a masterpiece of maritime engineering with polished brass railings, mahogany decking, and enough luxury amenities to rival a five-star resort. Grandpa was already aboard, looking distinguished in his crisp white blazer and captain's hat. At 80 years old, he still had the energy of a man half his age, greeting every guest with genuine warmth and that infectious smile that had charmed business partners for decades. The crew of 12 had everything perfectly arranged. Fresh orchids adorned every table, champagne was chilled to the exact temperature Grandpa preferred, and the galley was filled with aromas of the gourmet feast being prepared by our hired chef from San Francisco's most exclusive restaurant. That's when Sophia made her entrance. She stepped onto the gangplank, wearing a stunning red silk dress that hugged every curve, her dark hair styled in Hollywood waves, makeup applied with professional precision. She looked absolutely gorgeous, but there was something unsettling about her demeanor. Her smile seemed painted on, and her eyes kept darting around nervously. During our brief greeting, she asked an odd question that should have been a red flag. "So, Aaron, what are your big plans for the future? Any major life changes coming up?" The way she emphasized certain words made it sound like she knew something I didn't. As we sailed out of the marina into the open waters of San Francisco Bay, I found myself watching Sophia more carefully. She wasn't her usual vivacious self, mingling effortlessly with relatives and family friends. Instead, she seemed distracted, frequently checking her phone and excusing herself from conversations. Around noon, Grandpa pulled me aside to a quiet corner of the main deck. His expression was serious, more intense than I'd seen in months. "Aaron, after dinner tonight, I want to make an announcement to everyone. Something important about the future of our family and the business." His voice carried a weight that made my stomach tighten with anticipation. That's when I noticed Sophia. She was standing just around the corner, pressed against the wall, in a position where she could hear every word we were saying. When our eyes met, her face went completely pale, and she quickly hurried away without acknowledging me. Lunch was served on the upper deck with stunning views of Alcatraz Island and the Golden Gate Bridge in the distance, but the meal felt tense in a way I couldn't quite identify. Sophia barely touched her food, instead pushing the carefully prepared crab cakes around her plate while stealing glances at me across the table. Uncle Marcus, who'd always been close to Grandpa, made a comment that sent chills down my spine. "William, I think tonight's announcement is going to surprise some people. Big changes ahead for this family." The knowing look he gave me suggested he understood something about what was coming. I tried to catch Sophia after lunch to ask if she was feeling all right, but she disappeared again. I searched the yacht's various levels and finally found her in her stateroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with her head in her hands. When I knocked, she called out that she needed some time alone. As afternoon melted into evening, we sailed further from shore, eventually anchoring in a secluded cove about 2 miles from the nearest land. The isolation was beautiful, with nothing but endless ocean surrounding us, but it also felt ominous given the strange tension I was sensing from my sister. The sunset that evening was spectacular, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that reflected off the calm water. Under normal circumstances, Sophia and I would have stood together at the railing, taking selfies and laughing about childhood memories. Instead, she remained distant, watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. When Sophia finally reappeared for the cocktail hour, something had fundamentally changed about her. Gone was the nervous energy I'd observed all day. Instead, she carried herself with a strange, cold determination that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. She moved through conversations with mechanical precision, as if she was following a script she'd rehearsed. I had no idea that script included my death. As the golden hour faded into twilight, Grandpa gathered all 30 guests on the main deck. The yacht's crew had arranged elegant seating around the outdoor dining area, with soft lighting creating an intimate atmosphere perfect for a family celebration. Everyone was dressed in their finest attire, holding champagne flutes, as they waited for whatever announcement our family patriarch had planned. Grandpa stood at the head of the group, his white blazer immaculate, his posture straight despite his 80 years. The warm ocean breeze carried the scent of the gourmet dinner being prepared below, mixing with the salt air and expensive perfumes worn by the women in our family. "Thank you all for joining me on this special evening," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the deck. "I've spent the last few months thinking about legacy, about what happens to everything I've built when I'm no longer here to oversee it." A hush fell over the gathering. Even the crew seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, moving quietly as they prepared for dinner service. "I've decided it's time to share my plans for the Morrison family fortune." My heart started pounding. Sophia, who was sitting across from me, had gone completely rigid, her knuckles white as she gripped her champagne glass. "After careful consideration, I'm leaving the entirety of the Morrison Properties empire, including all assets, investments, and holdings, valued at approximately $1.5 billion, to my granddaughter Erin Morrison." The words hit like a physical blow. Gasps echoed around the deck as family members processed what they'd just heard. I felt the blood drain from my face, overwhelmed by shock and a growing sense of dread about what this meant for my relationship with Sophia. Sophia's reaction was immediate and devastating. She shot to her feet so quickly her chair toppled backward, the crash echoing across the now silent deck. "What?" she screamed, her voice breaking with emotion. "This isn't fair. This can't be happening." Grandpa remained calm, his expression sad but resolute. "Sophia, I know this is difficult to hear, but Erin has demonstrated over the past 10 years that she understands the responsibility that comes with this legacy. She's worked tirelessly to learn every aspect of our business. But I'm family too." Sophia's voice rose to a pitch that made everyone uncomfortable. Tears were streaming down her carefully made-up face, mascara creating dark streaks on her cheeks. "I love this family just as much as she does." "Love isn't enough, sweetheart," Grandpa replied gently. "This empire requires someone who understands sacrifice, who's willing to put the business above personal desires. Erin has proven herself capable of that level of commitment." The gathering had become unbearably awkward. Cousins were staring at their drinks, aunts and uncles exchanging worried glances, everyone uncertain how to react to such a personal family crisis playing out in front of them. I finally found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Grandpa, I had no idea. I never expected anything like this." The truth was, I felt sick to my stomach. Yes, I'd worked hard for the family business, but seeing Sophia's devastation made me question whether any amount of money was worth destroying our relationship. Sophia whirled to face me, her eyes blazing with fury I'd never seen before. "You knew," she accused. "You've been manipulating him, making yourself look good, while making me look like some spoiled party girl." "That's not true," I protested, standing up from my own chair. "Sophia, I swear I had no idea about any of this." But she was beyond reason. 10 years, she sobbed. 10 years of watching you become his favorite, while I got treated like some accessory to this family. Well, guess what, sister? This isn't over." With that declaration, she pushed through the stunned crowd of relatives and disappeared below deck, her high heels clicking angrily against the mahogany stairs. The rest of the guests sat in uncomfortable silence. Grandpa tried to salvage the evening by suggesting we proceed with dinner, but the celebratory mood was completely shattered. People picked at their food while making polite small talk, but everyone kept glancing toward the stairs where Sophia had vanished. Uncle Marcus leaned over to me during the main course. Aaron, your grandfather made the right choice, but this is going to create problems for years to come. Sophia won't accept this quietly. His words proved more prophetic than I could have imagined. After dinner, I couldn't stop thinking about Sophia alone in her stateroom, probably crying her eyes out. Despite everything, she was still my little sister, and I couldn't bear the thought of her hurting. I decided I had to try talking to her to find some way to make this right. That decision nearly cost me my life. I found Sophia in her luxurious stateroom on the yacht's second level, but the woman sitting on the edge of the queen-sized bed wasn't the heartbroken sister I'd expected to find. The tears had stopped completely. Her makeup was fixed. Most unsettling of all, her eyes held a coldness I'd never seen before, like she was looking at a stranger rather than her own flesh and blood. "Sophia," I said softly, closing the door behind me. "We need to talk about what happened up there." She looked up at me with an expression that made my skin crawl. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something much worse: complete emotional detachment. "Do we, Aaron? What's left to discuss? You won. I lost. Story over." I sat down in the armchair across from her, trying to bridge the distance that suddenly felt like a canyon. "That's not how I see this at all. Look, I know Grandpa's decision was shocking, but we can work something out. I never wanted this to come between us." "Come between us?" Sophia's laugh was hollow, devoid of any warmth. "Aaron, this doesn't come between us. This ends us. You've always been the golden child, the perfect granddaughter who could do no wrong, but I never thought you'd actually take everything." "I didn't take anything," I protested. "I had no idea about the will. This was Grandpa's choice, not mine. And if it means this much to you, we can figure out how to share it." Something flickered across Sophia's face at my words, but it wasn't gratitude or relief. It was something calculating and dangerous. "Share it," she repeated slowly. "You think you can just throw me some scraps and everything will be fine?" "That's not what I meant," I said, growing increasingly uncomfortable with her tone. "I meant we could work together, both be involved in running the business, or I could make sure you're taken care of financially. We're sisters, Sophia. Family means more than money." She stood up then, moving to the porthole window that looked out over the dark ocean. We were still anchored in that secluded cove far from shore, with nothing but black water stretching to the horizon. "Family," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know what, Aaron? You're right. It's too late for sharing. It's too late for working together. It's too late for a lot of things." The way she said it sent ice through my veins. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, she walked past me toward the stateroom door. "I need some air. This conversation is over." I followed her as she made her way through the yacht's elegant corridors and up the stairs to the main deck. Most of the other guests had retired to their rooms or were in the main salon sharing after-dinner drinks and trying to pretend the earlier scene hadn't happened. Sophia didn't stop at the main deck. She continued climbing past the bridge level all the way up to the top deck, where we'd converted the helicopter pad into an outdoor lounge area. This high up, with nothing but ocean surrounding us, we were completely alone. The moon had risen, casting silver light across the gentle swells. Under different circumstances, it would have been romantic, peaceful. Instead, it felt ominous, like being isolated on a stage where something terrible was about to unfold. "Sophia, talk to me," I pleaded, following her to the railing that looked out over the black water. "Whatever you're feeling, we can work through this." She turned around then, and what I saw in her face made me take an involuntary step backward. The sister I'd known my entire life was gone, replaced by someone who looked at me with pure hatred. "You want to know what I'm feeling, Aaron?" Her voice was eerily calm. "I'm feeling like I've wasted 26 years caring about someone who never saw me as anything more than competition." "That's not true," I said desperately. "You're my sister. I love you. Love me." Sophia took a step closer, and I noticed she was positioning herself between me and the only exit from this isolated deck. "You loved having someone around who made you look good by comparison. Saint Aaron and her party girl sister. Responsible Aaron and irresponsible Sophia. Well, guess what? I'm done playing that role." The yacht was rocking gently in the swells, and suddenly I became acutely aware of how far we were from shore. 2 miles of dark, cold water separated us from land. The crew was 3 levels below us. The other guests were either asleep or too far away to hear anything over the sound of the ocean. "Sophia, you're scaring me," I admitted, because suddenly I was truly frightened of my own sister. "Good," she replied, taking another step closer. "You should be scared, because you're going to learn what it feels like to lose everything you think you deserve." That's when I realized she'd been planning this moment since she'd overheard Grandpa's conversation with me earlier that day. Maybe longer. The question was planning what exactly I was about to find out. What happened next unfolded in a series of moments that felt both endless and instantaneous, like time had broken into fragments that my mind struggled to piece together. Sophia moved toward me with deliberate steps, her red dress flowing in the ocean breeze, her face a mask of cold determination. I backed up instinctively, but there was nowhere to go. Behind me was only the yacht's railing, and beyond that 30 feet of empty air before the black Pacific Ocean. "Sophia, whatever you're thinking, don't do this," I said, my voice shaking, as the reality of my situation became clear. "I'm thinking," she replied with terrifying calmness, "that if there's no Aaron, there's no problem with the inheritance." "You can't be serious." But even as I said the words, I could see in her eyes that she was completely serious. This wasn't a moment of emotional breakdown. This was premeditated. "You know what the beautiful thing about accidents is, Aaron? They're so convenient. Tragic, but convenient." I tried to edge sideways along the railing, looking for any path back toward the stairs, but Sophia mirrored my movements, blocking my escape route. The yacht was large enough that we were completely isolated up here, the sound of the ocean masking any noise we might make. "Think about what you're saying," I pleaded desperately. "I'm your sister. We grew up together. We shared a room until I was 10. You taught me how to braid my hair." For just a moment, something flickered across her face. A shadow of the girl who'd once protected me from bullies at school, who'd snuck me cookies when I was grounded, who'd held my hand during thunderstorms when we were little. But then it was gone, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. "That little girl is gone, Aaron. She died the moment Grandpa chose you over me." Before I could react, before I could even process what was happening, Sophia lunged forward with both hands extended. The push was sudden and vicious, catching me completely off guard. I felt her palms connect with my chest, felt my feet leave the deck, felt the horrifying sensation of falling backward into empty space. As I tumbled through the air, I heard her voice one final time screaming words that would haunt me forever. "You're no longer my sibling." The impact with the water was like hitting a concrete wall. The Pacific Ocean in October, even off the California coast, was shockingly cold. The temperature change sent my body into immediate shock, my muscles seizing up as I plunged beneath the surface. My dress, soaked through, became incredibly heavy, dragging me down as I desperately fought to reach the surface. Salt water burned my throat and nose as I struggled upward, breaking through just long enough to gasp for air, before another swell pushed me under again. Above me I could see the Golden Dream's lights, could hear voices, as other guests discovered what had happened. Someone was shouting my name. I think it was Grandpa, his voice cracking with panic and age. But I also heard Sophia's voice loud and clear, addressing the growing crowd on deck. "It was an accident. She lost her balance. I tried to grab her, but she fell." Even as I fought to stay afloat, even as the cold water began to numb my limbs and make swimming nearly impossible, I felt a new kind of shock at hearing her lie so smoothly, so convincingly. "Someone throw her a life preserver." That was Uncle Marcus's voice. "I'll get the rescue boat started." One of the crew members. But then Sophia again. "Wait, don't put anyone else at risk in the dark. She's a strong swimmer. Let her get to the life ring on her own." I was close enough to the yacht to hear this exchange, close enough to understand that my sister was actively sabotaging rescue efforts while maintaining the pretense of concern. She wanted the other guests to see her as a worried sister while ensuring I wouldn't be saved. The realization gave me a surge of adrenaline that helped me stay afloat for a few more minutes. But the cold Pacific was relentless. My body temperature was dropping rapidly, my movements becoming sluggish and uncoordinated. I tried to call out to tell everyone what really happened, but my voice was weak and kept getting cut off by waves that filled my mouth with salt water. From the yacht's deck, I probably sounded like someone struggling to swim rather than someone trying to expose a murder attempt. That's when I realized Sophia had planned this perfectly. We were far from shore, it was dark, and she'd positioned herself as the only witness. Her word against mine, except I might not survive to give my version of events. My strength was fading fast. Each stroke became more difficult, each breath a struggle. The yacht's lights were starting to blur as hypothermia set in. I was going to drown and my sister was going to inherit $1.5 billion. But sometimes the ocean has other plans. Just as I felt my strength giving out completely, just as I was beginning to slip beneath the surface for what I was certain would be the last time something bumped against my shoulder in the dark water. It was a large piece of debris probably washed overboard from another vessel floating like a makeshift life raft. In my hypothermic state, I almost didn't have the coordination to grab onto it, but survival instinct took over. I managed to hook my arm around what turned out to be a damaged cooler large enough to keep me afloat. For the next 8 hours, I drifted in the Pacific Ocean clinging to that piece of floating debris while fighting off hypothermia and shock. The water temperature was probably 55 degrees cold enough to kill within hours, but the cooler provided just enough buoyancy to keep my head above water and prevent me from drowning. During those endless hours, I had plenty of time to think about what had happened, about how thoroughly Sophia had planned my murder. She'd waited until we were far from shore, isolated on the top deck, with only her word to explain what happened. If not for that floating cooler, her plan would have worked perfectly. Dawn brought a Coast Guard helicopter dispatched after Grandpa had spent the entire night demanding search and rescue operations. The crew spotted me from half a mile away, a tiny figure in a bright blue dress, clinging to debris in the gray morning light. The rescue was swift and professional, but by the time they pulled me from the water, I was barely conscious. My core body temperature had dropped to dangerous levels, and I was suffering from severe hypothermia, dehydration, and exhaustion. The helicopter rushed me to UCSF Medical Center, where I spent the next 3 days in intensive care. Doctors said I was incredibly lucky to be alive, that most people wouldn't have survived more than 2 or 3 hours in those conditions. Sophia was the first family member I saw when I regained consciousness. She'd clearly been crying, her eyes red and puffy, her hair disheveled in a way that suggested she hadn't slept. She rushed to my bedside the moment I opened my eyes, grabbing my hand with what appeared to be desperate relief. "Oh, thank God you're okay," she sobbed. "I was so scared. When you fell overboard, I thought I'd lost you forever." For a moment, seeing her obvious distress, I almost doubted my own memories of what had happened. The medical team had warned that hypothermia and shock could cause confusion, false memories, even hallucinations. But then I looked into her eyes, and I knew. Behind the tears and the performance, I could see that same cold calculation I'd witnessed on the yacht's deck. She wasn't relieved that I'd survived. She was terrified that her plan had failed. "Sophia," I whispered, my throat still raw from salt water. "We need to talk." "Shh," she said, stroking my hair with gentle fingers. "Don't try to speak yet. The doctors said you might be confused for a while. Trauma can do that to memory." There it was. She was already laying the groundwork to discredit anything I might say about what really happened. Over the next 2 days, as other family members visited, I began to understand the full scope of Sophia's deception. She told everyone the same story: I'd been standing too close to the railing, the yacht had hit a larger wave, and I'd lost my balance. She'd tried to grab me but couldn't reach me in time. A tragic accident that could have happened to anyone. Grandpa was devastated, blaming himself for creating the family tension that led to me being alone on deck in the first place. Uncle Marcus kept shaking his head, muttering about how dangerous it was to be on the water at night. Aunt Helen brought flowers and kept saying how grateful she was that I'd survived. When I tried to tell them what really happened, that Sophia had deliberately pushed me, they exchanged worried glances and suggested I speak with a psychiatrist. The trauma, they explained gently, was making me paranoid and confused. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the psychiatrist they brought in, was kind but skeptical. "Survivor's guilt and post-traumatic stress can create false memories," she explained. "Your mind might be trying to make sense of a random accident by assigning blame." But I knew what I'd experienced. I knew what I'd heard Sophia say. And more importantly, I was beginning to understand that this hadn't been a crime of passion. She'd planned it. The question was, how could I prove it? On my final day in the hospital, Sophia came to visit alone. She brought fresh flowers, expensive chocolate, and that same performance of sisterly concern she'd been maintaining for 3 days. "I'm so glad you're coming home tomorrow," she said, arranging the flowers in a vase by my bedside. "This whole experience has made me realize how precious family really is." "Has it?" I asked quietly. Something shifted in her expression for just a moment. "What do you mean?" I remember what happened on that deck, Sophia. I remember what you said to me right before you pushed me." She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "Even if that were true, which it isn't, who would believe you? Everyone knows you suffered severe trauma. Everyone knows head injuries can cause false memories." Then she leaned closer, close enough that only I could hear her next words. "But hypothetically, if someone had wanted to solve a complicated inheritance problem, and if that person had been smart enough to plan it properly, and if they'd been unlucky enough to have their plan fail," she paused, smiling that cold smile I was beginning to recognize, "well, that person might just have to try a different approach." She straightened up, returning to her performance of the concerned sister. "I'll see you at home tomorrow, Erin. We have so much to catch up on." After she left, I lay in that hospital bed staring at the ceiling and realized that surviving the ocean had been the easy part. The real challenge was going to be surviving my sister. Because she wasn't done trying to kill me. The next few weeks were a careful dance of deception on both sides. Sophia continued playing the role of devoted sister, bringing me home cooked meals, offering to run errands while I recovered, constantly asking about my physical and emotional state. To everyone else, she appeared to be the perfect example of family loyalty. But I was watching her now with new eyes, and I began to notice things I'd missed before. How she always volunteered to bring me medication, offering to save me the trip to the pharmacy. How she suggested I might benefit from relaxing activities, like long walks near the cliffs behind our Malibu house. How she kept bringing up how fragile my mental state seemed, planting seeds of doubt about my stability with other family members. More disturbing were the conversations she didn't know I could hear. I developed the habit of moving quietly through the house, a side effect of still feeling vulnerable and jumpy from the trauma. Twice I overheard her on phone calls with people I didn't recognize, discussing legal matters in hushed tones. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after I'd returned home. I was supposed to be napping in my room when I heard Sophia's voice from the library below. She was on another one of those mysterious phone calls, and this time she wasn't being as careful about keeping her voice down. "The problem is, she survived," Sophia was saying, "and now she's getting suspicious. I need to know what options we have for challenging her mental competency." I crept to the top of the stairs, staying out of sight while straining to hear every word. "Yes, I understand it's complicated," she continued, "but think about it from a legal perspective. She suffered severe hypothermia, was in intensive care for 3 days, and keeps insisting that I tried to murder her. If that doesn't suggest mental instability, what does?" There was a pause as she listened to whoever was on the other end. "I don't care how long it takes or how much it costs. The inheritance is worth $1.5 billion. That's enough to make any legal fees worthwhile." Another pause, and then the words that confirmed my worst fears. "Look, if we can't prove she's mentally incompetent, we'll have to consider other options. She had one accident already. Tragic things happen to people who aren't careful." I'd heard enough. Moving as quietly as possible, I returned to my room and began planning my own strategy. If Sophia wanted to play games with legal technicalities and threats, I was going to have to beat her at her own game. The first thing I did was install a voice recording app on my phone. If she was going to continue making incriminating statements, I wanted evidence that would hold up in court. The second thing I did was start researching private investigators. I needed to know exactly who Sophia was talking to, what kind of legal challenge she was planning, and whether she had any other schemes in motion. But most importantly, I needed to make her feel confident enough to reveal her true intentions. 2 days later, I set my trap. I arranged to meet Sophia for lunch at a restaurant in Santa Monica, somewhere public, but with enough ambient noise that she might feel comfortable speaking freely. I made sure to arrive early and choose a corner table where I could position my phone to record our conversation clearly. When she arrived, I made a point of seeming fragile, uncertain, still affected by the trauma of my accident. I wanted her to think I was weak, confused, possibly even doubting my own memories. "I've been thinking about what happened on the yacht," I began hesitantly after we'd ordered, "and I'm starting to wonder if maybe everyone's right about my memory being affected." Sophia's eyes lit up with interest, though she tried to hide it behind a mask of sisterly concern. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe I did just lose my balance. Maybe there wasn't anyone else up there with me." I let my voice waver slightly as if I was genuinely uncertain. "The doctors said trauma can create false memories." "That's exactly what they said," Sophia agreed quickly. "And it makes sense, doesn't it? You went through something terrifying. Your mind is trying to process it by creating explanations that make sense even if they're not accurate. But the things I remember seem so real." I continued, watching her face carefully. "Like I could swear I heard someone say something right before I fell." Sophia leaned forward, suddenly very interested in the details of my false memories. "What kind of something?" This was the moment. I took a shaky breath and said, "I keep hearing this voice saying, 'You're no longer my sibling.' But that's crazy, right? Why would anyone say something like that?" The change in Sophia's expression was subtle but unmistakable. For just a split second, she looked triumphant, like a hunter who'd just confirmed her prey was wounded and helpless. "That does sound like the kind of thing trauma might create," she said carefully. "Especially if you were feeling guilty about the inheritance situation. Your subconscious might have invented a scenario where someone was angry with you." "You really think that's all it was?" I pressed, continuing my performance of vulnerability. "I'm sure of it," Sophia replied. "And then because she thought I was broken and defenseless, because she believed her plan was working perfectly, she made the mistake I'd been hoping for." She started talking. "Aaron, I want you to know that even though Grandpa's decision hurt me deeply, I would never actually want to harm you. You're my sister, and that means something to me, even if—" She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "Even if I sometimes fantasize about what my life would be like if things had gone differently." "What do you mean?" I asked softly. "I mean, sometimes I imagine what would have happened if you hadn't survived that night. I know it's terrible to think about, but I can't help wondering if maybe that would have been better for everyone." My blood turned to ice, but I kept my expression neutral, even vulnerable. She continued, "I mean, you're clearly suffering from PTSD. You're having false memories, feeling paranoid, probably going to need therapy for years. And for what? To manage a business empire that's going to consume your entire life." "I never thought about it that way," I said quietly. "But I have," Sophia replied, warming to her theme now that she thought she had me convinced. "I've thought about it a lot, actually. And honestly, Aaron, I think everyone would be happier if you just stepped aside. Let me handle the inheritance. Let me take care of the business. You could focus on getting better, maybe move somewhere peaceful, where you wouldn't have to deal with all this stress." "And if I don't want to step aside?" I asked. Sophia's mask slipped completely then. The concerned sister disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Well, then I guess we'd have to explore other options. Legal challenges based on your mental state. Or," she shrugged, "accidents happen, Aaron. Especially to people who aren't careful. You've already had one close call. It would be such a shame if something else happened." I had everything I needed. The recording I'd made of Sophia's threats was damning, but I knew it wouldn't be enough on its own. She could claim she'd been speaking hypothetically, or that I'd edited the conversation somehow. I needed more evidence, and I needed witnesses who couldn't be dismissed as easily as a traumatized sister with possible memory issues. Working with the private investigator I'd hired, a former FBI agent named Detective Sarah Chen, we discovered that Sophia had been much busier than I'd realized. She'd consulted with 3 different law firms about challenging my mental competency. She'd also been meeting with a financial advisor about how to restructure the Morrison Properties holdings, once she gained control. Most disturbing of all, she'd taken out a life insurance policy on me just 2 weeks before Grandpa's birthday yacht trip. The policy was worth $5 million with Sophia as the sole beneficiary. Detective Chen helped me understand that we were dealing with someone who'd been planning my death for much longer than I'd realized. The yacht incident wasn't a crime of passion triggered by the inheritance announcement. It was the culmination of a premeditated murder plot. "Your sister is dangerous," Chen told me during one of our meetings. "She's already tried to kill you once and she's clearly planning to try again. We need to move quickly before she escalates." The plan we developed was complex, but necessary. We needed to give Sophia enough rope to hang herself while keeping me safe from another murder attempt. First, I began leaving subtle hints that my mental state was deteriorating further. I mentioned having nightmares, seeing things that weren't there, feeling confused about basic details of my daily life. I wanted her to believe that her original plan was working, that the trauma from the yacht incident was destroying my credibility and possibly my sanity. Meanwhile, Detective Chen was gathering additional evidence. She'd managed to identify the lawyer Sophia had been consulting with about mental competency challenges. She'd also traced the suspicious phone calls I'd been overhearing to a small law firm that specialized in what they called complex inheritance disputes. The final piece of the puzzle came when we discovered Sophia's journal. I'd known since childhood that she kept detailed diaries, but I'd always assumed they contained typical entries about boyfriends, parties, and shopping trips. Detective Chen suggested we needed to see what she'd been writing recently, particularly around the time of the yacht incident. Getting access to her private journal required waiting for the right opportunity. That came when Sophia announced she was taking a weekend trip to Las Vegas with friends. She'd be gone for 3 days, giving us plenty of time to search her room thoroughly. What we found was horrifying. The journal entries dating back 6 months revealed the depth of Sophia's planning and the extent of her hatred toward me. She'd written detailed fantasies about my death, described researching methods of murder that would look accidental, and even practiced her grieving sister routine in front of her mirror. The entry from the day before the yacht trip was particularly chilling. "Tomorrow is Grandpa's party, and tomorrow everything changes. I've thought through every detail. The yacht will be perfect. Isolated dark water, no witnesses except me. I'll wait until late in the evening when everyone else is distracted or asleep. All I have to do is get Erin alone on the upper deck and give her a little push. The cold water and distance from shore will do the rest. By morning, I'll be the grieving sister who tried desperately to save her, and I'll be the sole heir to $1.5 billion. But the most disturbing entry was dated 3 days after my rescue. She survived. I can't believe she actually survived. All that planning, the perfect setup, and she manages to stay afloat for 8 hours in the Pacific Ocean. But this isn't over. If anything, it's better this way. Now she looks mentally unstable, talking about murder attempts that never happened. I can use her paranoia against her. A few more months of this, maybe another accident that she survives, but that damages her credibility even further, and I'll be able to have her declared incompetent. Then the money will be mine anyway, and everyone will think I'm the devoted sister taking care of her disabled sibling. We photographed every relevant page, ensuring we had documentation that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Now it was time for the confrontation. I arranged to meet Sophia at the family house in Malibu on a Saturday afternoon when I knew we'd be alone. I told her I wanted to discuss stepping aside from the inheritance, letting her know that I was finally ready to admit I wasn't capable of handling the responsibility. She arrived looking triumphant, clearly believing her long-term manipulation had finally succeeded. "I'm so glad you're ready to be realistic about this situation," she said as we sat in the living room where we'd played as children. "I know it's hard to admit, but you're just not well enough to manage something as complex as the Morrison Properties empire." "You're right," I agreed. "I've been thinking about everything you said about how everyone would be happier if I just stepped aside." "Exactly," she said, unable to hide her satisfaction. "And I want you to know that I'll take good care of everything. You'll be provided for, of course. You'll never have to worry about money." "That's generous," I replied, "especially considering you tried to murder me." The change in her expression was instantaneous. The mask of sisterly concern vanished completely, replaced by cold fury. "You can't prove that," she said flatly. "Actually, I can." I reached for my phone and played back the recording from our restaurant conversation, the one where she'd admitted to fantasizing about my death and threatened me with another accident. Sophia listened to her own voice with growing alarm, but when the recording ended, she tried to laugh it off. That doesn't prove anything. I was speaking hypothetically, trying to help you work through your paranoid delusions. What about this? I pulled out printouts of the most incriminating journal entries and watched her face go completely white. You went through my private things, she whispered. I had to, I replied. Because you've been planning to kill me for months and I needed evidence to protect myself. For a long moment we stared at each other across the coffee table. Where we'd once done homework together, played board games, shared countless sisterly moments that now felt like they'd happened to different people. Finally Sophia spoke, and her voice held none of the fake warmth I'd been hearing for weeks. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I tried to kill you. Yes, I've been planning ways to get rid of you. And yes, if you don't sign over that inheritance, I'll find another way to make sure you don't live to enjoy it. Even now, I asked. Even knowing that I have evidence that I could go to the police that your life as you know it is over, you still think murdering me is the answer. That money should be mine, she said with conviction that chilled me to the bone. I'm part of this family too. I deserve my share. You deserve to share, I agreed. But you don't deserve to commit murder for it. That's when she made her final mistake. Instead of backing down, instead of showing any remorse or recognition of how far she'd fallen, Sophia doubled down on her threats. You think having some recordings and journal entries makes you safe? She asked, standing up from her chair. You think anyone will believe the traumatized sister over the devoted one who's been taking care of you? I think they'll believe the evidence, I replied calmly. Evidence can disappear, Aaron. Accidents can happen to phones, to documents, to people who don't know when to keep their mouths shut. She was still threatening me even now, even knowing I could destroy her life with a single phone call to the police. That's when I realized she was never going to stop. The sister I'd once loved, the little girl who'd shared my room and my secrets, was completely gone. In her place was someone who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. It was time to end this. I picked up my phone and dialed 911. I'd like to report an attempted murder, I said, looking directly at Sophia as I spoke. My sister pushed me off a yacht 3 weeks ago and she's just threatened to kill me again. The look of shock and betrayal on Sophia's face almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the cold water of the Pacific Ocean, the 8 hours I'd spent clinging to debris while fighting for my life, and the weeks of psychological manipulation that followed. I didn't feel sorry for her anymore. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. Detective Chen's investigation had provided a mountain of evidence, from the insurance policy Sophia had taken out on my life to the recorded conversations where she'd confessed to attempted murder. The journal entries were particularly damaging, showing clear premeditation and ongoing intent to harm me. Sophia was arrested that same afternoon and charged with attempted first-degree murder and making terroristic threats. Her bail was set at $2 million, which she couldn't afford since her trust fund had been frozen pending the criminal investigation. The media attention was intense but brief. Headlines like "Billionaire Heiress Pushed Sister Off Yacht" dominated local news for about a week before being replaced by other scandals. I was grateful when the story faded from public consciousness, allowing our family to begin processing what had happened in private. Grandpa was devastated not just by Sophia's actions, but by his own role in creating the situation. He blamed himself for not recognizing the signs, for not understanding how deeply the inheritance decision would affect her mental state. I thought I was protecting the family legacy, he told me during one of our long conversations in the weeks following Sophia's arrest. I never imagined I was putting you in danger. I didn't blame him. How could any of us have predicted that sibling rivalry would escalate to attempted murder? The trial lasted 6 months. Sophia's defense attorney tried to argue that she'd suffered a mental breakdown triggered by the trauma of losing her expected inheritance. They painted her as a victim of family pressure and unrealistic expectations, suggesting that her actions were the result of temporary insanity rather than calculated evil. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Maria Santos, methodically presented evidence showing that Sophia's actions were premeditated and ongoing. The journal entries, the insurance policy, the recorded threats, and testimony from the private investigator all pointed to someone who'd made deliberate choices to commit murder for financial gain. I had to testify, reliving that night on the yacht and the weeks of manipulation that followed. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, looking at my sister sitting at the defendant's table while describing how she'd tried to kill me. Sophia never showed remorse during the trial. Even when faced with overwhelming evidence of her guilt, she maintained that she'd been justified in her actions. In her mind, I'd stolen what rightfully belonged to her, and she'd simply been trying to reclaim it. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before finding her guilty on all charges. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison without possibility of parole for the first 15 years. As the bailiff led her away in handcuffs, Sophia looked back at me one final time. I expected to see hatred or anger, or at least some recognition of what she'd lost through her choices. Instead, I saw nothing. Her eyes were completely empty, as if the sister I'd once known had never existed at all. The aftermath of the trial was both liberating and heartbreaking. I was finally safe from Sophia's threats, but I'd also lost my sister forever. Not just to prison, but to the person she'd chosen to become. The healing process was slow and complex. I worked with Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery and family betrayal. Through our sessions, I learned that what I'd experienced wasn't just attempted murder, but a profound violation of trust that would take time to fully process. Betrayal by a family member creates a unique type of trauma, Dr. Martinez explained. It attacks not just your physical safety, but your fundamental beliefs about love, loyalty, and family bonds. She was right. For months after the trial, I struggled with basic trust issues. I found myself analyzing every interaction, wondering if people had hidden motives, questioning whether the love I felt from others was genuine. But gradually, with professional help and the support of friends who proved their loyalty through actions rather than words, I began to rebuild my sense of security in the world. One of the most healing relationships came from an unexpected source. Jake Morrison, a distant cousin I'd met during the legal proceedings, had been horrified by what Sophia had done to me. He'd grown up in a different branch of the Morrison family tree, building a successful career as an environmental engineer, while staying largely separate from our family's real estate empire. Jake understood the complexity of my situation in ways that others couldn't. He'd grown up with Morrison money but had chosen to make his own way in the world. He understood both the privileges and the pressures that came with our family name. More importantly, he saw me as a person rather than an heiress. Our relationship developed slowly, built on genuine compatibility rather than financial considerations. For the first time in years, I felt like someone valued me for who I was, rather than what I represented. A year after Sophia's conviction, Jake and I were married in a small ceremony attended by the family members and friends who'd supported me through the ordeal. Grandpa walked me down the aisle, and I could see how much joy it brought him to witness something positive emerging from such a dark period. I also made the decision to use a significant portion of my inheritance for philanthropic purposes. Working with Jake, who brought expertise in sustainable development, we established the Morrison Foundation for Family Violence Prevention. The foundation provides support services for people who've experienced betrayal or violence from family members, funding everything from counseling services to safe housing programs. The work gave me a sense of purpose that went beyond managing real estate investments. Every person we helped represented a small victory over the darkness that had nearly consumed my own family. 5 years have passed since that terrible night on the yacht. I still have occasional nightmares about falling into black water, still feel a flutter of anxiety when I'm on boats, still struggle sometimes with trusting people completely. But I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting or pretending the trauma never happened. It means integrating the experience into your life in a way that makes you stronger and more compassionate. I think about Sophia sometimes, wonder if she ever reflects on the choices that destroyed our relationship and landed her in prison. I've been told she's eligible for supervised visits, but I've never felt ready to see her again. Maybe someday I will. Maybe someday she'll find a way to take responsibility for what she did, and we'll be able to have some kind of relationship again. But maybe not. And I've learned that's okay too. The money that Sophia was willing to kill for has become a tool for healing rather than destruction. The Morrison Properties empire continues to grow under my leadership, but it's no longer the most important thing in my life. What matters most is the family I've chosen and built around me. Jake and I have 2 children now, a daughter named Hope and a son named William after his great-grandfather. They're growing up understanding that money is a responsibility, not an entitlement, and that the true measure of a person lies in how they treat others, especially when no one is watching. I've learned that some people will betray you for money, for power, for reasons you'll never fully understand. But I've also learned that there are people who will stand by you when everything falls apart, who will help you rebuild not just your life, but your faith in humanity. The sister who tried to drown me taught me what betrayal looks like. But the people who helped me survive and thrive afterward taught me what love actually means. And in the end, love is worth infinitely more than $1.5 billion. Before we finish today's story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to rebuild your life afterward? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your story might help someone else who's going through something similar. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more true stories about overcoming life's most difficult challenges. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's possible to survive even the worst betrayals. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that no matter how dark things seem, there's always a way forward. You're stronger than you know, braver than you feel, and more loved than you realize. Stay strong, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.